This episode of the Pain Education Corner is sponsored by the Comella Foundation. The Comella Foundation is committed to relieving pain naturally using osteopathic healing principles. Here at the Comella Foundation, we envision a world where people achieve their maximum potential by being empowered with knowledge and skills to heal themselves and others. This information is to be used for educational purposes only and not to be construed as medical advice. If you have any questions or concerns, please consult a licensed healthcare professional. Hello, it's Bill, the knee pain guru. Welcome to the Pain Education Podcast. And we have Dr. Andrea Moore back live. And we're going to talk today about how, and help me with this, working with our ancestors.
Yeah.
There can be a physical pain experience in this reality as a result of ancestral, something that's happened in your ancestral lineage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll refer to it as like intergenerational trauma.
Sure.
And
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah. And that's not, I know I've heard of a lot of studies of from psychologists, psychiatrists that traced what happened during World War II, both on the Russian side and the German side, and how that is showing up in conditions that are happening in today's grandchildren from those days. So
yeah. And there are, and I think anyone listening who's like, what is this woo-woo stuff or anything like this? It's like, they are really, it's an incredibly complex thing to study for very obvious reasons, because there's so many factors here. But what they are showing is that there's studies of like, where I'm familiar with it is like grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. Their cortisol levels are different, their stress levels are different, like their nervous systems, their susceptibility to chronic diseases and having chronic pain is all raised, it's affected. And I think they've shown it too. I know there was, I should have looked it up. One of the many potato famines or famines is that were somewhere in Europe. It's like the same thing. It's like the grandchildren that are really heavily affected. And there's a really good study. I can't remember if I told you this last time, but I'll say it again, in mice, that the cherry blossom study. Are you familiar with this one?
I am not. No.
Okay, awesome. Well, this will be exciting. Okay, so they did a study where they took mice, because these poor little mice are, easy to study, but they shocked them every time that they were exposed to the smell of cherry blossoms.
Ooh, okay.
And I know, poor little guys, right? So they kind of like the Pavlov's dogs, right? Like it would get to the point where the mice would have a stress response just from smelling cherry blossoms. So they created like this trauma association with cherry blossoms. And then those mice had babies, and their babies, without ever being exposed to the electric shock, had a trauma stress response.
Okay.
In response to smelling the cherry blossoms.
Okay.
Whereas mice who weren't exposed, their babies had no reaction to the smell.
Okay.
So it shows us that trauma is passed down, or I don't even like to look at it as, it is traumatic to be shocked with electric shock, right? But it's like this protective mechanism is passed down through the DNA. And this went on for like generations of mice before it kind of then got bred out. But it was like 5-6 generations before they lost that, even though none of the grandchildren or great-great-grandchildren were ever exposed to the electric shock.
To the shocking of those mice.
Yes.
Wow.
Just the original ones, right? So, and I learned this study from, just want to give credit to where I've learned it from, is Dr. Valerie Rain, and she wrote a book called Patriarchy Stress Disorder. And she was one of my mentors. And so this is where I learned a lot about intergenerational trauma, was from her and her program. And I just thought the study was so profound because it's in animals, there's no stories attached, right? This is like a purely nervous system reaction. There's no other explanation for it. Whereas with people, it's harder to weed out what has been passed down also through story or patterns or behaviors, and like what's actually in the DNA versus what did your parents teach you to be resilient about or watch out for, or stuff like that, right? Mice, that wasn't the case. So again, it just all kind of proof that we know that trauma gets passed down through the DNA through like multitude of studies, and I would say it's being studied more and more now. So
that's fascinating. And I can see it's a ripple in the pond. Like where things are getting passed down. I know there's characteristics that I see in myself that I'm like, oh, that's what my dad did. That's what my mom did. And that could be completely learned. And I know I'm passing that to my daughter in a certain sense. Of course, there's a dilution of it, but that still exists. And I think at times, how much is this being passed down from my grandparents or great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents?
Totally. Yeah. And yeah, I personally got into it because I was raised very privileged, but my lineage has a massive amount of trauma. So I think for me, I was like, and I want to share this in case anybody else can relate, of like, I was walking through the world and I felt like I was having reactions to things that were not, it wasn't appropriate for my environment, if that makes sense. Like it didn't make sense. And as much as there are learned behaviors, my parents, they basically, in a really healthy way that most people do, is just hide all their trauma and don't ever talk about it. So I wasn't exposed to it really through story through them. I mean, sure, in other ways, but really my experience just kept being this like feeling of I literally felt like I was holding on to something that was not mine. And I don't know if I could have described it in exactly those words, but it was just, there was just this sense of like, why can I not move through these certain patterns? Like, why do things feel like so much easier to other people? That was really like how the pattern was showing up. I'm like, I felt like everyone was just moving through life so much easier than I was. And so when I got exposed to intergenerational trauma, it all made sense because both of my parents immigrated, which is one of a huge trauma, but both immigrated due to like the Russians invading their homeland and them having to escape out of their country. So that's like my direct parents. And then my grandma was in Auschwitz, and my grandpa was also a Holocaust survivor. So like, I just have a lot of trauma in my lineage.
Sure.
And,
yeah.
There has been zero processing of it. And I think more that's, as things are being learned more and more about it, it's usually not the generation that's holding the trauma that can process it. Like it's especially traumas like that, like it's too big. So often,
just to be understand you, the generation that's holding it, meaning your generation, your parents
that directly experienced the trauma,
isn't capable of diffusing the trauma in their neuron. Got it. Okay.
Exactly. Like it is going to probably be passed down, and that's okay. And it's like, really, when you look at humanity, like whose lineage doesn't have trauma, right? Like, and I think there are different degrees. Like my lineage does have a massive amount of trauma, whereas someone else, might be a little further back in the lineage or not as big. But yeah, I would say it's to me, it's usually a component of almost everyone's healing, or why, especially when I'm talking about chronic pain, right? Of why our nervous system is a little bit more sensitized, since that is the reason that chronic pain occurs in the first place, is from a sensitized nervous system. So
sure. So that charge passed down from the grandparents to the parents, from the parents to the child. And now I'm feeling this charge in my neurology that didn't happen to me. So it seems out of context with my life. Someone says boo and I fall on the ground crying. What is that? That doesn't make sense. That's not appropriate. That's not the appropriate response for a nervous system that is calm and mellow.
Yes.
So how can we begin to understand this experience and begin to diffuse that intergenerational trauma?
Yeah. I want to even back up and say, before we move into the intergenerational trauma piece,
Okay.
because I love your example of like, boo, and you fall down on the ground crying, right? Like, I'm going to guess for most people who have this like hyper vigilant response, chances are there has been a lot layered onto it, because there's probably a lot of shame and guilt, resistance, anger, frustration, because if you're that person who, maybe you do have like that heightened, scare reflex, that means one, people might be just jerks to you throughout your life and scare you more often and then make fun of you for it. Right.
Right.
Or in like my case, because I felt like I had such a hard time moving through it, I just built up this massive amount of resistance to the charge that I was feeling. I kind of like the way of describing that, like that I would get this feeling in my body. And so then I just started like hating on this feeling, because I was like, it's this feeling that keeps getting in my way. Right. And so I think it's always important to differentiate between like what is ours and what is not ours to process. And I think, go ahead. There's always
that can get super muddied, because what is actually the ripple in the pond, and what is things that have happened in my life that is adding to that ripple in the pond. And it gets I bet you it gets really muddy and murky and difficult to make distinctions on what is what.
Absolutely. And the good news is we never need to logically be figuring it out. Like, we can trust that our bodies can figure it out. So we never need to logically be able to do it. And it's never done in a perfect order. And it's always both. And it's, working with something. And it's really just being able to make sure you can access it. Because I don't do this part, but let's say like I have energetic techniques that I use, but I wouldn't say I'm like the go-to expert in ancestral processing, if that makes sense. But let's say you go to someone, or like, there are people who really just do more energetic work around it, which I tried to do early on. I could never access it. Like, I would do these sessions and, work with these people who claimed that they could do it. And I felt like it never got me anywhere. And now in retrospect, I can realize it's because I had so much of my own stuff layered on top. And even like attachments to it, that, you know what I mean? It was just like, there was so much in there like that they were never able to even access it. I had to work through so many of these layers, and then I could access it. And again, there's no right, or there's no order of doing it perfectly, but if you've had that experience, or it's usually not something you can just jump right to, like magically clearing is really it. So it's always being able to really feel what we're feeling. And then we can just ask the question of like, how much of this is mine? And literally just ask your nervous system that, of like, how much of this is even truly mine in the first place? And sometimes like a percentage will pop in your mind, or like you'll, see something on a bar of like, oh, 50%, or none of it is, or all of this is yours. But that's a way to start differentiating.
Got it. And is this ancestor work that you're doing, is this, oh gosh, I'm working on the question. I know there's a question there.
You're so good. Yeah.
Formulated. Is this you're working with yourself in a therapy session with a practitioner that understands this? Is it something like a solo practice? Are you working with ancestors that are still alive, ancestors that have passed? Kind of I'm trying to get my arms around where we're talking.
Yeah, I would say, so for me, the way like I'm personally working through it is I have my own coach or practitioner who is an expert in it. Because I think with a lot of this ancestral stuff, we always need someone else to hold the space.
Sure.
Like, we need another nervous system. especially if you're not, unless you're already very experienced in like a very somatic embodiment energy perspective, I think you can do some stuff on your own. But again, I'm an expert in it in terms of like the somatic embodiment piece. I do it for my clients. I hold the space for them, but I can't hold the space for my own nervous system at the same time as doing it, especially these really big things. So yeah, I definitely recommend working with someone who is, especially when it comes to the ancestral stuff, somebody who knows what they're doing, for sure. So I feel like I was going to say something else in response. Oh, and then you were asking about like kind of what ancestors are you working with? So I would say for me, it's been like a kind of a process that has evolved over time, because I at one point started to do some ancestral work that was really more about like connecting and strengthening, like trying to get like ancestral wisdom. But I wasn't able to get that from my most recent ancestors because there was so much trauma in there. Like the lineage hadn't been healed yet. So it's like when I was connecting with them, it actually kind of, and I just like, I think that I had like guilt about this, is that like it felt terrible. Like it didn't feel like they were supporting me. It actually felt like worse. And then I got instructed to not connect with my most recent ancestor. Like I was thinking of my grandma, for instance. It was, how far back do you need to go to where they are healthy?
Yes.
And it was like, the image in my mind was like, oh, okay, well, that's like 4,000 years back. Like, all right.
Could be a while.
Yeah. So I have my like one like ancestral dude that is like my, like an image I get in my mind that he's very supportive. And so it's like from him, I can get like a lot of like sourcing and wisdom, but like for the rest of my ancestral lineage, like I'm still working on clearing out a lot of the trauma. And so maybe I'll get to the point where I can connect with them for the wisdom, but like I'm personally not there yet with my ancestral lineage. So yeah.
And when you connect with this ancestor, this male ancestor or male energy that is 4,000 years back, what does that feel like? How does that feel? I'm trying to get an understanding or zero in on what is that felt sense in you where you go, that's him.
Good question. I'm going to share my felt sense. I'm going to just encourage everyone to be like, this may not be your felt sense.
Sure.
So, but one, I would say in general, there's what first happens is like a calming of my nervous system, and like a clarity that happens, and like a lightness that happens. But the sense I get, and I like almost can feel it right now just talking about it. Hey there. He's always behind me, which is interesting because I don't get a lot of things that show up behind me. And I feel like he's always like dancing around a fire, but he's actually always like from behind me, like almost like pulling energy out of my body. And it always feels really good. Like it's like clearing stuff out. It's like endless pulling he's been doing. So yeah, that is my felt sense. It's almost like this like massive, to me, I like almost get the sense that it's like working its way through the like lineage, and I'm just like allowing the process to happen, but I'm not processing it through my body, but I'm like the conduit, I guess, if that makes sense. I've never thought about that until you asked me that. So that just came to me as I was talking. But yeah.
Well, I'd like to point out that awareness, that feeling that you experience when you connect with that ancestor. Think about when we were little and we were by our uncle, aunt, grandma, grandpa, whoever that was, it's like you sat on their lap or you sat at the base of their rocking chair or the couch, and you had a certain sense when you were around them, how you felt when you were around them. You didn't feel the same when you were with your mom or your dad. There's a different sense and a feeling. And I think this is what we're cultivating. We were talking about this briefly before the call, is that there's this cultivation of that relationship, that feeling, that understanding that we're building the more we do it, the more we flex that energetic muscle in our mind on these ancestors that are around us all the time.
Yeah. I love that way of looking at it, just like flexing the muscle. And yes, the like the building of the relationship. Absolutely.
Well, it's neurology.
Yeah.
Neurology. If you go to lift weights, it is a pattern that you're forming in your neurology to strengthen your physical body. This is no different.
Yeah.
You're strengthening your relationship, that neurological connection, because we're talking about trauma that's stuck in the nervous system.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at everything through the lens of the neurology. What is going on? If it's trauma, if it's pain, whatever it is, it's through the neurology. And is it a sympathetic or a parasympathetic state? And if you're tapping in with an ancestor that it has lots of trauma, well, that's what you're going to feel in your neurology. It's going to get jacked up. But if you're tapping in with that ancestor that is healed, that is centered and focused and balanced, that can help you move what is going on, well, there you go. Parasympathetic state, healing takes place.
Yes. I love that. I love that distinction. So important. So good.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, I don't know where that came from, but there you go.
No, it's so good. And I'm so curious because I know you have experience with it too. So I'm just curious in terms of like, if you have any like favorite techniques or I don't know, anything that you want to share.
Okay. Well,
whatever you feel.
Here we go. And we had the last podcast that you and I spoke on. I think this popped up at the very end of the podcast and I was like, ding, 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 ding. Okay. This is a cool topic to talk about. And my experience was I was feeling very lost in my life in terms of what is going on? Why do things why do I keep throwing gutter balls with everything? And I need to kind of get the ball down the center and start throwing strikes. And I began working with some people that had experience with developing and cultivating relationships with ancestors. And that was just this vague concept. It didn't totally make sense or land with me, but it was something that I began doing physical things on a daily basis, setting up altars where I would light a candle and set up water and have pictures of my relatives that have passed on those altars as a way of supporting what I felt was lacking in my life. And the more I did that on a daily basis, there was this sense of calm that came within me, that it was like, oh wow, it started bringing back memories of when I was little, of when I was a young boy, teenager in my 20s, and they were still around, and what they would say to me. It's like there was something about their passing that was traumatic for me, that I lost these memories.
Oh yeah.
And then it was like, well, how would they look at this situation that I'm in? What would they say? How would they advise me? And ironically, the more I started looking at that type of relationship in my life and what I was doing to cultivate and nurture that relationship, the more I started seeing things that were shining through in other aspects. Napoleon Hill, for instance, one of Andrew Carnegie's protege. I don't know if you know who
I'm familiar. Yeah.
Familiar. Okay. Well, in his thing, he talked about having a board, bringing people in from a board, and he would bring people in that were deceased. And he would consult with his board on a daily basis as to how he would make business decisions.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's like all of a sudden when you see these very successful business people were doing something very similar to what I was doing, that it was like, this isn't as far out there as it was being led to believe.
Yes.
That this is not out of the ordinary, that there are very, very successful people in the world that have used this type of connection with those that have gone before them as a way of navigating through the world and using this input as a perspective, not as like the be all end all. Because I went down that road and I was like, oh, I just ended up in a dead end because I took too much stock into that perspective. Like, this is it. And they taught me a very valuable lesson. So it's all about really connecting with yourself and trusting in the decisions that you make.
So good. So good. And I love that distinction that you put in there of like, you're not blindly following what they're saying or like what message you're getting. It's then ultimately coming back and trusting yourself. I think that is, oh my gosh, so important, because when you hear a message, it can then be true. Like, I know if I communicate with my, grandma who's, passed away, the message she's going to be sending me is one that is based out of a lot of fear. Right. But I love like how you're like, I can then take that message and hear it and also know her history, know the fear, and I can then make it make sense for my life of like, hey, look, let me update you that like my life actually doesn't have that same fear in it. It's now a different year. It's not, you know what I mean? And yes, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like, I love that of you're not just like taking whatever they say and doing it, because I think that's where a lot of people can go. That's where I went wrong initially, like years ago. I was like, oh yeah, let me just follow what they say, not realizing everything that their guidance was so fear-based that it wasn't serving me. And I never really followed it just because it would freak me out too much. So I had to first build the self-trust and trust myself to receive any message and then do what makes sense for me and what's aligned for me from it, but taking whatever wisdom comes from it. So I love that you said that.
Did you ever ask her what she needs?
I'm building that relationship now.
There you go.
That's like, we're getting there.
What does she need to facilitate the release of that trauma, of that fear?
That'll
be big.
Huge
shift right there. That's big time. That's good stuff. Oh, anyhow.
I love that question though, of like, what does this part need or this person need? It's so good.
Yeah. Whoever is struggling.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times, without getting into too much detail, when I have conversations, there will be, unless they're wanting something before the conversation happens. If you think about it, it's no different than if you were to have someone stop over your house. You have a friend stop over and you like to have a nice conversation with them. Would you like some coffee? Would you like some tea? What would you like? And then let's talk. And sometimes that's it. And it's no different. It's the same type of relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. And yes, I feel like that question can be applied to like, what do you need to like even just parts of yourself, like inner child or anything like that. Of just,
totally. Yeah.
What do you need? And the cool thing is, for everyone listening, is like, you get to just give it to them, like in your mind. It's so easy. You can be like, all right, cool. There you go. You got it.
Yep. Yeah. There's no, and I think there's, for me, growing up, there was definitely you got to do this first to deserve it. You have to, you got to jump through hoops in order to be deserving of that thing, whatever that is. And now it's like we have make your own adventure. You want this? Here, right there. No,
totally.
No, anything.
Yes.
We don't have to wait.
Exactly. Don't need to earn it. Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Pain Education Corner. If you have a special talent or skill to relieve pain and you'd like to become a guest on our show, visit us at thecomellafoundation.org/interview. Help us spread the word on eliminating pain and suffering in the world. That's thecomellafoundation.org/interview.
Yeah. Just because you showed up. That's it. It's all you got to do is show up.
Yes. Oh, I love it. Yes, absolutely.
Anyhow.
This is good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think some of the questions, when we're asking questions out of our own trauma, like what we need to get over the knee pain, the neck pain, the back pain, the hip pain, whatever it is, the emotional grief from myself, my life, or what's passed along in the ripple. We ask the right question. And a lot of times it's only asking the right question. It's like the nervous system just drops.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it's palpable.
Yes. And I think that's where having somebody else sometimes ask the question to facilitate it can change everything, because they might be able to just twist it just slightly or see it where it's getting stuck or anything like that. And it's like, you're so right. The right question. It's like, oh, everything just drops before you even get the answer. It's like, oh my gosh, it's amazing how much that shifts things. Yeah.
And isn't that part of the trauma, is not seeing the nuances and the distinctions?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's the black and white thinking, right? It's thinking like it's seeing, or it's often not seeing, where you are stuck in black and white thinking, but often we cannot see it for ourselves.
Right.
It has to be sometimes pointed out to you, and you need to like be given that like third option to like kind of blow your mind a bit of like, oh my gosh, wait a minute, there is a third option. Because often when we're stuck in it, I'm trying to like think of a good example right here, but it's like we're stuck in it. It's like we are so convinced that these are the only two scenarios. Like either I cure all my pain and then I can go live a happy life, or I am stuck in pain and I'm going to be suffering and be miserable for the rest of my life. Right? It's like those are the only two possible paths.
That's it.
Like, actually, there's like 48 other paths.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
We just can't see them, and that's okay. It's not like no one can see them for themselves a lot of times. So, yeah.
I got a great example of that. There was a situation, relationship that I was like, well, I've asked her to do this and she doesn't do this. And I've asked her for this information and she doesn't give it to me. And then, I was going on and on. I was stuck in this loop. And I had this mentor of mine at the time. And he looked at me, he goes, well, can't you get that information? And it was a total like jaw drop, deer in the headlights. Like, yeah, I could. And it was a game changer for me, not relying on her to do what she was either incapable or unwilling to do. Yes. And that was like, oh, yes, I'll go do the research on that. I'll find that out. Yeah. And anything that I could do myself, I will do, and stop asking her for it, because I'm not going to get it and I won't be let down anymore. That's such a good example. I'm going to give one more example now.
Okay, cool. These are good to shake people up. I thought I wanted, I was just actually talking about in terms of parenting, of like, it can feel like either I yell at my kid and show him what's right and show him the right way and get mad at him for doing it the wrong way and show him that his way is wrong, right? Or I have a kid that just does whatever they want, they're disrespectful, and there's no rules or boundaries. That's like, there's actually an option C, where we treat our child like a human and are respectful and have a conversation with them, and, can lovingly show them another option. Totally. They're still learning and they're brand new to the world and they don't know. So yeah.
I found that with my daughter. I try to ask questions to understand how she was viewing things.
Yes.
Like, because when my daughter was 2, I took her in the woods and we were walking through the woods, and she was going this path that was, I was like, no, you don't want to go that way. And of course, I'm 6 foot. I see the woods very differently. So I squatted down to her height and I saw what she was looking at. And I was like, that makes total sense. How she was walking through the woods.
Yes.
It made total sense from her 2 foot tall perspective. It made sense.
Yes.
However, I didn't see it that way until I looked at it from her perspective. That was such a huge lesson for me in terms of asking her when she does something, whatever it is. And I encourage her to voice herself to me as like, well, what were you thinking there? What was going on for you? And she'll go and she'll explain the whole thing. And I'll be like, that makes total sense. I get you.
Totally. Oh my gosh. That forest example is so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing it. That is, oh my, I'm like going to go cry now. That is so beautiful. And so many, like, what a just like a like literal way of being like literally seeing the world through someone else's eyes. Like it changes everything, and being able to see that and understanding where they're coming from and then taking action from there and choosing what to do next. So that's beautiful. Now I feel like we've gone in so many directions, but I love it.
Yeah.
It all relates.
it does all relate because it's all neurological.
Yes.
It's what's stuck in our neurology, in our DNA, and it's the ripple down from those that have gone before us. Yeah. And what's fascinating to me, and you brought this up, and I don't think we made the distinction, but I've heard it talked about the ancestors on the other side of the veil. And what there's a couple of veils that I've recognize. One is those that you've met while you were still alive, and then those that you haven't met that have passed before you, but you still maybe have pictures of. And then there's other ones that are, depending on how far back you go, that there is you just have names. You know nothing about them. No one alive today met them that is able to share that with you. And then you got others that there's no name for them. Like, we came from somewhere. There had to be somebody along the line that met and got together and then had children and had the one, so it's like I see these layers of veils. Like you said, going back 4,000 years, of course, everybody had somebody in there. So when we start to, I don't think when that concept was first introduced to me, I was like, oh, wow, I never thought about it that way. I never thought about it in generational understanding that these are people that played a role in my existence, that they had habits and pet peeves and patterns and stuff that are playing out in me right now.
Yes. And I love that, just that nuance there, because I feel like there is so much nuance to all of that. And it brings up that story of, I don't know if you've heard, it's kind of like a folk tale or whatever, of the woman who, she goes to make her Thanksgiving turkey and she like cuts the end off of it. Yeah. And her husband's like, why are you doing that? Well, because my mom did it. And she goes to ask her mom, like, why do you cut off the butt? Well, because grandma did it. And they go to ask grandma and they're like, why did you do that? She's like, because it didn't fit in my oven.
It didn't fit in the oven, right?
Yeah. And it's just like, we do these things without questioning if they still make sense in our own life, because they were just passed down. So it's just taking that time to be like, why did you do that? Does that still make sense in my life? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Yeah.
And I think that there's this, at least for me, there was this place that somehow it was better back then, that somehow that there was a wisdom or a knowledge
Mhm.
that is secret, or like there was an understanding of life that we've lost.
Mhm.
And as I got into that, and what was a great thing for me is I got into baking Italian desserts and cooking, like
Nice.
my great grandmother's pasta sauce recipe
Mm.
and my great grandmother's ricotta cake. She had this
Mm.
it's Italian cheesecake. And I started playing with the recipes, and there was some point in the process that all of a sudden I started like, oh, I wonder if I tweaked this a little bit. It turned out,
Yeah.
I'll say better.
Mhm. Yeah.
There was this place where all of a sudden I felt like I graduated. I felt like it was like now I was creating the story that others would want to emulate, rather than thinking that I lost something from the past.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah. And I love that it's like it was a journey to get there. Like, oh, that's such a cool way to describe it. Yeah.
I had to screw it up a lot. I had to do things and try things and test things and experiment with things. But yeah, I think there's this place where like there's an honoring of the ancestors when we show up more present, more fully present in our life than they were able to, for whatever reason.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I so agree to that. And I know for me, I had to move through a lot of, I think, guilt to get to that place where I could honor, because I had a lot of guilt for how good my life was compared to my parents and compared to my grandparents. And that I didn't have to work for it. Right. And so it felt like almost shameful that I could just experience all these things. And it was a journey to move through that, to get to that place of like honoring and being like, oh wait, they wouldn't have wanted me to live my life in less than, because it's like they worked this hard, they went through all they did so I could have all of this, so presented to me. So yeah.
Well, they freed it up for you.
Yes,
to do the work.
Yeah. Yes. That is. Yeah. I yes. And that is actually one of the things that I say to a lot of the women I work with who are carrying this. They're kind of like, what the hell, why am I carrying this? And I'm like, my belief really is that we are, especially for women, that we're finally in a place, like literally for one of the first times in history, where women have the freedom to do this work and the safety to do this work. And obviously that's still not true in a ton of parts of the world, right? But like for the women I work with who, are more privileged, they do have like a level of safety in their lives. It's like, now they're struggling with chronic pain and illness, because now it's like the lineage wanting to be healed, because it's like, oh, you have the safety and the resources to heal. And those, we never had those before.
Yep.
So yeah, because I work with a lot of like entrepreneurs, like women who are making a lot of money and feel like, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot that comes up with that, because there's like an inherent unsafety in the nervous system for like women who are now holding money, because it wasn't until 1980 where a woman could even have her own bank account. It's like, it's all very new. So yes to the like freeing up so we can do the work. Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's, and the more we could create the capacity in our neurology to move more.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, I tell my clients, the good thing about being more aware is you're more aware, and the bad thing about being more aware is you're more aware.
Oh gosh, yes. Yes,
it's a double-edged sword.
It so is. But I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, well, you don't have a choice.
I don't. You can't.
There's
Unfortunately, you can't become unaware.
Well, you could try. I see people. They're doing a good job of it.
Yeah. Once you see it though, it's so hard to unsee it.
Yeah, it's more painful though. Like,
Yeah.
I think the physical pain, at least in my experience of physical pain in my life has been to course correct, has been to guide me in a different direction.
Yeah.
And if I don't recognize that course correction, then I'm continuing to go down the path that is going to lead to more pain. Like, I needed to dislocate my left knee 4 times before I went to the doctor. So my learning curve was a little flat, and then I needed to pivot and go in a different direction in my life because it just wasn't happening the direction I was going.
Yes. And yeah, I think we have such a similar view on pain, and that it's like sending this message for us to receive. And sometimes seeing it's hard. But that's
Yeah. Well, our own
work.
Like what you were saying, you need that outside perspective to be able to share and see it objectively, because you could see what's going on with me infinitely better than I could see what's going on with myself, because I'm in it. I don't see my blind spots. If I saw my blind spots, they wouldn't be blind spots, and vice versa. Vice versa.
Yes. Yes. I just had a client because Voxer me and just be like, I really hate how much it helps to just like work with this with someone else. I just always wish I could just do it myself. And then I message you and I feel so much better. I'm like, it's how our nervous systems are built. But yeah, sometimes it's a pain in the butt.
Well, I think there's baby steps we could take.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think what happens many times is when I was, and this happened to me a bunch of times, I had a mentor and they're like, do this, just do this between now and the next time we talk. And I didn't do the thing.
Yes.
I would do everything else except the thing that they told me to do. And then I'd show up again and I was like, well, it didn't change that much. They're like, well, did you do the thing? Well, I didn't. And I think that's the trauma. That's that ripple effect of whatever it is, trauma from my life, trauma from Ancestral, that is creating the blind spot. Like everything inside of me didn't want to do that thing. And if I would have just done it, it would have been a game changer.
Yeah. But if it's not safe to bring in the game changer into your life, your whole body is going to resist doing it.
Yes, but when is it, here's a question, because I don't necessarily know the answer. When is it that I'm going to use exercise as an example. Sometimes exercise will benefit you if done correctly. And other times, if you push yourself to do the exercise, you actually injure yourself more.
Yep.
So with that one thing that's going to be a game changer, am I resisting it because my nervous system doesn't feel safe? Or am I avoiding this in some way that is perpetuating my stuckness?
Yeah. And I think they're both related.
Totally.
Right. Like the reason, we like perpetuate our stuckness is because it's like that fear of success almost. Like it's like we don't feel safe to be safe. Like if your nervous system is always used to chaos and used to trauma and used to the sympathetic state, if you're trying to enter in something that is bringing in that calm or, kind of this like almost knowing of like, ooh, that's actually going to be like a really good successful path. And in the way you're just defining success, of course, your nervous system will be like, oh, F that. Like, I don't want to go down that path. That's terrifying. Right.
Right.
But in terms of like exercise specifically, I think it's such a great question. And I think this is there's never any one instance that's going to make or break anything. for the most
True.
part. I mean, I suppose for exercise, you could probably, whatever, but let's not get too dramatic here. Right. But it's like,
Yeah.
sometimes it is literally data gathering and gathering evidence, and in like tiny little doses of like, oh, what happens if I do this? How does my nervous system respond? Because sometimes we cannot, I think for so many things, we cannot know until we take an action. And
True.
it's that action that is going to then give us more information, and then we can take another step. Right. And that action could be literally like doing one more lunge, right? Of like, okay, let me just see what does happen if I do one more rep. What new information do I have here? And then retaking it into consideration. So sometimes you have to take action. Sometimes that action might lead to failure, but that's new information.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, it's always coming back to like knowing when you're talking to your own like authentic wisdom, that self-trust that you talked about, and knowing when you're communicating with that side of yourself versus a part of yourself that is stuck in a trauma, that is stuck in the stuckness. Because if you're communicating with that part, they're going to be like, stop, don't do the thing, right? They're going to be sending you a message of all the reasons why you shouldn't do the thing. Whereas if you're really communicating with that aligned part of yourself, they might be telling you something very different. So it's like, what voice are you listening to?
Yeah.
That's developing that skill to listen to those different voices. Go ahead.
Yes, I think I got the insight on that. And I knew it on some level. I just didn't articulate it in the example. So the example was exercise. And if I make the exercise be this unmovable, unchangeable exercise, then I may need to do something else. Like instead of lifting the heaviest weight I've ever lifted, maybe it's doing something that looks like running on a treadmill a little bit to warm up and then see how things go, instead of trying to put a square peg in a round hole at that time, that it can evolve and change. So the one thing can possibly be broken down into smaller baby steps that can be worked and then build up to the thing that needs to be done.
Yes.
It's the nuance.
It is.
The distinctions and nuances in the process.
Yeah. And it's such a good example, because like I'm building out a course right now, and my course is so focused on being able to get that nuance in the first place, to like develop that connection with yourself that you can then make that nuance. Because for example, like in, having my own business, if I have a business coach, they tell me to do something. They're not like a trauma informed business coach, right? Every time I hear something, it like lights me up in terms of all this stuff, because I still have all these things that I work through from like on the business side. But they tell me the thing that they want me to do. Let's say it's send an email that says X thing. And I'm like, okay, sure, I'm going to go do that. And then I'm like, holy shit, now I got to go deal with all my like trauma and fear and whatever that's coming up. But they're not the person I deal with it with, right? Like now I have my tools. Like again, now in order to send out the email, some of my steps are sitting with a fear and being with a fear and maybe doing some clearing and doing that, right? But I now see that inner work as such like an integral part to any step I'm taking.
Sure.
So that's kind of really what I'm trying to teach people, is like, once you know that, how to do that piece, once you know how to sit with discomfort, sit with fear, sit with uncertainty, anxiety, any of those things, you can do anything. Because you're right, like you're breaking it down into like, that becomes the first step. Of not letting that stop you. I don't know if that makes sense, but anyway.
It does. It does. I was shown it as staging. Like staging, like many times I can get an incredible amount done, not by doing the thing, but getting everything prepared to do the thing. And I'll work on a project, and then I look at all of the components I need to do that project, getting it all together, and I'll have it in a pile. If it's something physical, or maybe I just need to send a text, or maybe, it's like I'll set up all of these. What is the next little easiest step that's going to move things forward?
Yes. I love that. I love the little, just look next little step. It's so important.
Mm-hmm. Which could be sit with the fear for the uncertainty for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That's all you got to do.
Yeah. It's basic.
Okay. So that 5 minutes is like, oh.
Terrible 5 minutes, but it always pays off so much. I might procrastinate for an hour before taking those 5 minutes sometimes, but once I do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing how much it helps. Yes.
Yeah. But all this translates to pain.
It does.
Everything.
Yeah.
It does. Like, and ancestral work, I see it as integral. It's been my experience of what I have moved through.
Yes. And it's so cool to see that you bring it into your practice too, because it's so important.
Yeah. And I told you about this, the whole Comella Foundation. That was a manifestation of all of that work. It was
so cool.
It was my my Sicilian grandfather.
That's so cool.
So yes.
Oh, love it.
Cool. How you feeling?
Good. This is great. I know. I'm like, okay, I feel like people, this is a lot probably to take in. So take your time with this. Listen a few times.
I was actually just going to say that whenever there is information, like a lot of information I hear for the first time, it can be overwhelming and difficult to integrate. And so I'll give a first listen through and put all of my panic or whatever comes up for me listening to it aside, and then listen to it a second time. And a lot of times that second and or third time, it lands on a way different level that it's like, oh, it makes sense. Because there's sometimes the first time you can't even hear it. There's things that I've listened to even this week, podcasts or videos. No way I'll hear it the first time. The second, third time, it's even better.
Totally. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So, okay. Are we complete today?
I think so. Yeah.
It feels like a good place to stop.
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
I will leave an open invitation to you.
Thank you.
And if there's another topic that you want to dig into, let's do it.
Sounds
I think
good.
it's fun. And we'll just jump on another call. But we will, what I will do is, once again, we'll have all of your contact information down below. Website, whatever we had set up on the first one, we'll just do that again. And then this way, if somebody wants to reach out to you, connect with you, talk with you about what we talked about today, what we talked about first podcast, they can do so and sign up for your program. Do you have a name for your program yet?
Unweaving Chronic Pain.
Go figure. Awesome.
Yes. Oh, this is so good.
Cool. Okay. Well, then we're good. Anything else you'd like to say before we wrap it up?
No, this is great. I love talking about this. And if anybody does have any questions, or there is a question that I can come back and clarify, or, people want to hear more of, let me know.
Great. Awesome, Andrea. Thank you so much for being here. This is Bill Paravano, the knee pain guru, going to wrap it up for today. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you on the next one.
Thank you for tuning into this week's segment of the Pain Education Corner. Join us next week for another conversation on natural healing methods to eliminate pain. To learn more about the work we do at the Comella Foundation, please visit our website at the Comella, COMELLA, foundation.org.